The first time Halie saw Enyalius bleed, the sky was falling apart above the eastern cliffs of Astravale and the sea below was boiling black from divine fire. Thousands of soldiers were dying on the shore while priests screamed prayers into storms that no longer answered them. Enyalius, feared across all kingdoms as the undefeated god of war, stood alone against the titan Charon with a spear shattered in his hands and half his chest torn open. Every god in the heavens had abandoned the battlefield after realizing Charon could devour immortal flesh, but Halie had stayed hidden among the wounded mortals, clutching her healer's satchel with shaking fingers while blood and rain soaked her white robes. She had only come to search for survivors. She had never intended to step into the war itself. Then she saw Enyalius fall to one knee. The titan raised a mountain-sized axe overhead while thunder cracked through the clouds, and for one suspended second the entire battlefield froze in terror because if the war god died, the gates protecting heaven would collapse. Halie remembered running before she remembered deciding to run. Her sandals slipped through mud filled with corpses and broken shields. Arrows streaked overhead. Somebody grabbed her wrist and screamed at her to stop, but she tore free and climbed the hill toward Enyalius while Charon roared loud enough to split stone. The titan's axe descended. Halie threw herself between them. The blade pierced straight through her shoulder and buried itself into the ground beneath her feet. Agony exploded through her body so violently she vomited blood across the battlefield. Yet silver light burst from the wound instead of death. Charon recoiled. Half-divine blood poured down the axe handle like molten moonlight, and the titan's flesh began smoking where her blood touched it. Enyalius looked up at her in stunned disbelief, his dark hair soaked red, his golden armor broken open across his ribs. "What are you?" he rasped. Halie barely managed to answer before collapsing against him. "Someone foolish." What followed became legend in every kingdom except hers. Halie gave Enyalius enough of her divine blood to restore his strength, though the process nearly killed her. Revived, Enyalius rose with terrifying fury and slaughtered Charon before sunrise. Songs spread across the continent about the war god who defeated the titan alone, and eventually the stories changed until Halie disappeared from them entirely. At first she did not care. She had not saved him for glory. She cared only about the way he returned to her chambers afterward carrying winter roses in scarred hands too large for something so delicate. "You should hate me," he told her quietly that night. "Instead you brought flowers," she asked with a weak laugh from her bed. "I brought a warning," he replied. "Anyone tied to me suffers." But he kept returning. Days became weeks. Weeks became seasons. Halie learned the god-feared silence more than war. Enyalius confessed terrible things during sleepless nights when they sat together beside candlelight overlooking the sea. He spoke about the hundreds he had killed before reaching adulthood. About how the gods forged him into a weapon before he understood mercy. About the emptiness that followed every victory. Halie listened without judgment. When nightmares woke him, she placed cool hands against his face until the shaking stopped. Slowly the brutal war god softened only around her. Servants whispered in disbelief after seeing him kneel beside gardens to help her plant herbs. Soldiers nearly fainted when he smiled during festivals because she stood nearby. For the first time in centuries Enyalius began refusing unnecessary wars. The heavens celebrated his change publicly while privately resenting the half-goddess responsible for it. Halie ignored the growing tension because she believed love made sacrifice worthwhile. Then her younger sister Liessa arrived in Astravale. Liessa had always lived like sunlight reflected across water, beautiful. Impossible to hold, forever searching for admiration in every room she entered. Mortals adored her. Gods gifted her jewels. Unlike quiet, awkward Halie, Liessa understood exactly how to command attention. When she embraced Halie at the palace gates after years apart, she wept dramatically into her shoulder while servants watched. "I missed you terribly," Liessa declared. Halie smiled despite exhaustion from healing wounded refugees all morning. "You said my letters bored you. That was before you became famous for taming the god of war." Enyalius disliked Liessa immediately. Halie noticed it during their first dinner together when Liessa laughed too loudly at every story and touched Enyalius's arm each time she spoke. The war god barely reacted. His gaze remained fixed on Halie across the table. Later that night he stood behind Halie on the balcony while moonlight silvered the ocean below. "Send your sister home," he said bluntly. Halie turned in surprise. "She arrived this morning." "She lies when she smiles." Halie sighed. "Not everyone is a hidden assassin, Enyalius." "No," he answered coldly. "Some are worse." She kissed him to end the argument. For a while she believed his suspicion came from simple irritation. Then strange things began happening throughout the palace. Private conversations somehow reached rival gods. Sacred relics disappeared from sealed chambers. Priests loyal to Enyalius started turning against him after secret scandals spread through heaven. Every disaster seemed impossible to trace. Meanwhile Liesa remained endlessly charming, comforting everyone while subtly positioning herself closer to Enyalius during moments of crisis. Halie noticed the pattern too late. The betrayal began the night she discovered she was carrying Enyalius's child. Rain hammered the palace windows while she waited inside their chambers, smiling uncontrollably despite nervousness. She had imagined this moment for weeks. Enyalius had never spoken openly about wanting children, but she had seen the softness in his eyes whenever families passed through the city. She placed his favorite wine beside the fire and rehearsed different ways to tell him. Then the doors opened. Liesa entered first. Her lipstick was smudged. Enyalius followed several seconds later, shirt half open, expression unreadable. Halie's joy died so quickly she physically felt it vanish from her chest. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched unbearably while rain battered the glass behind them. Liesa finally exhaled shakily and pulled Enyalius's cloak tighter around herself. "Halie," she whispered, "I never meant for this to happen." The wine glass shattered in Halie's hand before she realized she had crushed it. Blood dripped onto the floor. Enyalius stepped toward her instinctively. "Listen to me. Did you touch her?" Halie asked. Her voice sounded strange, almost calm. Liesa started crying immediately. Enyalius hesitated. That hesitation destroyed everything. Halie backed away slowly, staring at him as if seeing a stranger wearing his face. "You promised me," she said. "I know. You promised." "Halie, get out." Liesa hurried forward with theatrical tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please don't hate him. It was my fault." Halie slapped her so hard the sound echoed across the chamber. Liesa stumbled into Enyalius, clutching her face in shock. For one brief instant satisfaction cut through Halie's grief. Then Enyalius caught Liesa protectively before she hit the floor. Protectively. Halie never forgot that instinctive movement for the rest of her life. "Leave," she whispered again. This time they obeyed. The palace transformed afterward into a slow nightmare poisoned by humiliation. Rumors spread across heaven within days. Some claimed Halie failed to satisfy the war god. Others whispered Enyalius deserved a true goddess rather than a half-blood healer. Liesa played the role of guilty victim perfectly, constantly apologizing while remaining inseparable from Enyalius during public appearances. Enyalius himself became increasingly distant, trapped between rage, confusion, and guilt. He tried speaking privately with Halie countless times, but every conversation collapsed into accusations and silence. Halie wanted to tell him about the child growing inside her. Pride stopped her each time. Then came the night she overheard Liesa speaking with the high priest Thamiel inside the temple crypts. Halie had been searching for stolen healing scrolls when she heard her own name echo through the darkness. She hid behind pillars while torchlight flickered across ancient bones. "She still suspects nothing," Liesa said coldly. Gone was the sweet voice she used publicly. "Good," Thamiel replied. "Once the child is born, the prophecy becomes dangerous." Halie's blood froze. "Enyalius remains weak around her," Liesa continued. "But he's already drifting closer to me. Another few months in heaven will support replacing Halie entirely." "And the baby?" "The same fate as its mother." Halie stumbled backward in horror, accidentally knocking loose a stone. Silence snapped through the crypts. Thamiel turned instantly. Someone's there. Halie ran. Footsteps thundered behind her through the temple corridors while panic clawed her lungs raw. She barely reached the palace gardens before divine chains wrapped around her ankles and slammed her violently into marble steps. Thamiel emerged from the shadows alongside Liessa, whose expression held no trace of guilt now. Only contempt. You should have stayed ignorant, Liessa sighed. Halie tried summoning healing light, but another chain crushed her wrists. Enyalius will kill you, she spat. Liessa crouched calmly beside her. No. He'll believe you betrayed him. The trap closed perfectly. By dawn, sacred documents had been planted in Halie's chambers linking her to traitorous gods. Witnesses falsely claimed seeing her steal relics. Worst of all, Liessa appeared before Enyalius bruised and trembling, insisting Halie attacked her in jealous rage after threatening their unborn child. Halie screamed the truth during the trial held beneath heaven's silver towers, but evidence drowned her words. Enyalius sat upon the war throne wearing black armor while thousands watched. His face looked carved from stone. Did you conspire against the heavens? He asked quietly. No. Did you threaten Liessa? She's lying. Did you steal sacred relics? Look at me, Halie begged desperately. You know me. Pain flickered briefly across his expression. Then Liessa began crying beside him. Enyalius closed his eyes. Halie of Vale, he declared heavily, you are stripped of divine protection until judgment concludes. Golden chains erupted around her body. The crowd roared approval. Halie stared at him in disbelief so profound it felt unreal. Not once during the sentence did he meet her eyes again. The following 3 years destroyed her piece by piece. Imprisoned beneath the lower temples, she endured endless interrogations, starvation, and torture designed specifically for immortal bloodlines. Thamiel oversaw much of it personally. He enjoyed reminding her that Enyalius never came searching. Whenever guards dragged her broken body back into darkness after another punishment, Halie repeated the same thought to survive, he does not know. He would stop this if he knew. But months passed. Then years. Eventually hope rotted into bitterness. Her pregnancy became impossible to hide during the second winter. When the guards informed Thamiel, fear briefly crossed the priest's face. He ordered immediate action. Halie fought like a cornered animal when they came for her child. Chains snapped. 2 guards lost eyes beneath her nails. Divine energy burst uncontrolled through the prison corridors while she screamed Enyalius's name over and over. Nobody answered. In the end there were too many of them. They pinned her against cold stone while agony ripped through her body. Hours. Later she awoke alone in darkness with blood covering her legs and silence filling the space where another heartbeat had once existed. Something inside her permanently broke that night. Afterward Halie stopped begging. Stopped explaining. Stopped believing anyone would save her. She survived through pure hatred. Then, during the 3rd year of captivity, the prison beneath the temples exploded. Halie woke to screams and collapsing stone. Smoke flooded the corridors while alarms echoed overhead. At first she assumed heaven had fallen under attack. Then her cell door slowly creaked open. A man stood beyond the wreckage wearing black robes stitched from shadows. His skin looked pale as moonlit ash. Silver tattoos moved across his throat like living serpents. Most terrifying of all were his eyes, bright crimson with vertical pupils that marked him unmistakably as demonic royalty. Halie dragged herself backward against the recognition. Not from memory. From blood. Her pulse became painfully erratic. The silver power inside her stirred violently in response to the tower's appearance, almost like a heartbeat answering another heartbeat across impossible distance. Aurelius turned toward the sanctuary slowly, and for the first time since arriving, genuine uncertainty crossed his face. It shouldn't awaken yet, he murmured. Seraphel looked equally shaken. The seal is deteriorating faster than predicted. Vale glanced between them sharply. Can someone explain why the haunted nightmare tower is waking up on its own? No one answered immediately. Then the mountain beneath them trembled hard enough to crack the battlefield apart. Several radiant vessels lost footing and tumbled screaming into the ravine below. The whispers surged louder than ever. Not words anymore. Singing. Endless voices singing beneath reality itself. Halie nearly collapsed from the sound. Enyalius reached her first, steadying her before she hit the ground. "Stay with me." His voice sounded distant beneath the chorus hammering through her skull. "They're calling her," Halie whispered. Seraphel's expression darkened. "No. They're calling Elara." Another tremor ripped through the mountains. The silver chains surrounding the distant tower glowed brighter. Then, impossibly, something enormous moved behind one of the upper windows. Halie's breath caught. A silhouette. Human-shaped. Watching them. Aurelios recovered from his shock first. "We end this now." Golden fire erupted around him violently. Every remaining radiant vessel on the battlefield immediately turned toward Halie as one unified movement. "Kill anyone who interferes," Aurelios ordered calmly. "Bring her to the sanctuary alive." The attack came instantly. Radiant soldiers surged forward again while black fractures split across the mountain pass beneath their feet. Vale cursed and threw himself into the nearest group, abyssal flames tearing through corrupted wings. The Rose rallied surviving celestial guards beside him while Seraphel's followers unleashed silver wards against the fractures spreading through the stone. But Halie barely saw any of it. The singing from below the world kept growing louder. Images flashed uncontrollably through her mind. Endless dark oceans. Silver chains wrapped around bleeding hands. A woman kneeling alone beneath a black sky for thousands of years. Halie gasped and clutched her head. "Halie!" Enyalius's grip tightened around her shoulders. "Look at me." She forced herself to focus on him instead of the visions. Rain streamed down his battered face. Blood mixed with the water across his broken armor. He looked exhausted beyond reason. Yet all his attention remained fixed entirely on her. "You need to leave the battlefield," he said firmly. "No, this isn't negotiable. Everything in my life becomes negotiable the moment people decide I'm useful." The words hit him visibly. Halie softened slightly despite herself. "I'm not running while all of you die for me again." Before Enyalius could answer, Aurelios descended toward them through the storm like falling sunlight. His spear of golden fire materialized instantly in his hand. Touching, he remarked coldly. "Still building your identity around saving broken women." Enyalius moved in front of Halie immediately. Still mistaking cruelty for wisdom. Their weapons collided hard enough to split the mountainside. The explosion hurled nearby soldiers backward while cracks raced through the cliffs. Halie staggered from the shockwave and nearly fell into a widening fracture before Vale grabbed her arm. "Move," he snapped. "Now." "Enyalius will survive another 5 minutes without you staring at him dramatically." He dragged her through the chaos toward the northern ridge while the Rose and several guards fought to clear a path. Behind them, Aurelios and Enyalius tore through the battlefield with catastrophic force. Golden fire clashed against celestial lightning while entire sections of cliffside collapsed into the ravines below. Halie looked back once just in time to see Aurelios drive his spear through Enyalius's shoulder and pin him against shattered stone. Rage exploded through her instantly. Silver light surged outward from her body automatically, blasting every radiant vessel nearby off the mountainside. Aurelios glanced toward her and smiled. There she is. The singing below the world intensified again. The fractures beneath the battlefield widened. Black mist poured upward from the cracks, now carrying hundreds of distorted hands clawing toward the surface. Seraphel's voice cut through the storm sharply. "The seal is rupturing directly beneath us." Halie realized with horror that the battle itself was feeding the instability. Every death. Every surge of divine power. Every moment of grief. Aurelios knew it too. This entire attack had been designed to weaken the barrier further. "He's stalling us," she shouted toward Vale. "He wants the seal to break." I assumed the apocalypse cult leader wanted apocalypse, yes. Another violent tremor struck. Then came the scream. Not human. Not monstrous either. Ancient. It echoed from the distant sanctuary tower itself. Every soldier on the battlefield froze instinctively at the sound. The silhouette behind the tower window moved again. This time Halie saw it clearly. A woman wrapped in enormous chains rising slowly from darkness. The silver power inside Halie reacted so violently she doubled over, gasping. Blood, a voice whispered directly inside her mind. Not the devourers. Different. Weaker. Lonely beyond comprehension. Come home. Tears sprang unexpectedly into Halie's eyes. She did not know this woman. Yet she felt the weight of 6,000 years pressing against her chest. Elara. Enyalius tore himself free from Aurelios's spear with a roar and blasted the first light backward through two collapsing cliff walls. Then he looked toward Halie and immediately understood something was wrong. What happened? The sanctuary is calling her, Seraphel answered grimly. Aurelios emerged from the rubble above them, laughing softly despite blood pouring from several wounds. Excellent. He spread his metallic wings wide. At last. Suddenly the radiant vessels stopped attacking again. All of them turned toward the distant tower exactly as before. Their golden eyes widened unnaturally. Then, one by one, they began screaming. Blackness erupted from inside their bodies instantly afterward. Devourer essence burst through flesh and armor alike in violent explosions of shadow. Entire soldiers were ripped apart from within as massive dark limbs emerged from their torsos. The battlefield descended into horror. What is happening? The Rose shouted. Seraphel stared in shock. The sanctuary, her voice tightened. It's rejecting corrupted souls. More screams echoed across the mountains as radiant vessels collapsed into piles of black ash. Aurelios's calm finally shattered. No, the silver chains around the distant tower blazed brighter than moonlight. Another ancient scream rolled across the world. This one carried fury. Every remaining trace of devourer corruption on the battlefield recoiled violently from the sound. Even the fractures in the ground began closing slightly. Halie suddenly understood. Elara was fighting back. From inside the prison beneath the sanctuary, the ancient goddess had sensed the corruption spreading again. And she was furious. Aurelios realized the danger immediately. Stop her, he ordered desperately toward the surviving radiant forces. Before she fully wakes. But it was too late. The black tower's upper walls cracked open slowly. Silver light poured outward across the mountains in colossal beams that pierced the storm clouds above. The singing beneath the world changed abruptly into shrieks. Pain. Fear. The devourers were afraid. Halie stared at the impossible sight while the voice inside her mind grew clearer. Child, Elara whispered. They lied to us. The word struck Halie harder than any weapon. Because beneath the loneliness and exhaustion, she heard rage older than kingdoms. Not at the devourers. At heaven itself. Aurelios launched toward Halie instantly after that realization crossed his face. She cannot reach the sanctuary. Enyalius intercepted him midair. Their collision detonated across the pass again, but Aurelios fought with open desperation now rather than confidence. You don't understand, he roared while trading blows with the war god. If Elara awakens completely, she'll destroy the seal herself. Silence rippled briefly through the battlefield. Even Halie froze. Seraphel looked horrified. That's impossible. Is it? Aurelios shouted bitterly. 6,000 years buried alive while the gods fed her grief into the prison? You think that leaves mercy intact? The possibility crashed into Halie like ice water. Elara was not merely a victim. She was an ancient goddess tortured beyond imagination. If she decided vengeance mattered more than survival. Another pulse of silver light erupted from the sanctuary. This time the mountains themselves cracked. Massive fissures spread across the northern cliffs while avalanches thundered into the valleys below. The tower chains strained audibly. Halie felt Enyalius' presence strengthening rapidly now. Awakening. Enyalius landed beside Halie hard enough to fracture the stone beneath them. Blood streamed from dozens of injuries across his body. "We move now," he said breathlessly. "To the sanctuary." Vale stared at him. "You heard the genocidal angel. The ancient goddess might destroy reality. Then we stop her." "Excellent plan. Very detailed." Halie looked toward the distant tower where silver light continued flooding across the mountains like divine fire. Somewhere inside that prison waited the first woman sacrificed to save creation. And for the first time since learning the truth about the seal, Halie felt something stronger than fear. Anger. Not only for herself. For all the women buried beneath history so others could call their suffering noble. She looked toward Enyalius. If Enyalius wants revenge, his expression tightened painfully. "I know." Halie turned back toward the awakening sanctuary. "Then heaven deserves to be afraid." They abandoned the battlefield before dawn. Not because the fighting ended, but because the mountains themselves had become too unstable to hold an army. Entire cliff faces continued collapsing beneath waves of silver light radiating from the sanctuary. The surviving radiant forces scattered into the valleys while celestial guards focused entirely on evacuation. Even Aurelios disappeared into the chaos after one final clash with Enyalius shattered a bridge across the eastern ravine. Halie caught only a glimpse of him retreating into the storm, metallic wings trailing gold fire through the darkness like a dying star. He did not look defeated. He looked afraid. That frightened her more than anything else. The journey north became a race against catastrophe. Their group narrowed to only a handful by necessity: Halie, Enyalius, Vale, Seraphel, Theros, and 6 surviving members of the Morning Court. The rest remained behind to slow the spreading fractures consuming the mountains. They traveled through narrow frozen passes where ancient statues lay buried beneath snow and ash, remnants of civilizations erased so long ago even Seraphel could no longer name them. The farther north they moved, the stranger the world became. Trees appeared made entirely from white crystal. Rivers flowed upward against gravity. Shadows moved independently from the people casting them. Halie realized gradually they were entering territory warped by the sanctuary's presence over thousands of years. Reality itself bent strangely near the prison. No one slept much. Every few hours the world shook again as silver pulses erupted from the distant tower. Each pulse carried fragments of emotion across the landscape. Rage. Grief. Loneliness so vast it felt oceanic. Halie experienced them more intensely than the others. At times she nearly stopped breathing beneath the force of Enyalius' sorrow pressing against her mind. The ancient goddess no longer whispered gently either. The closer they came, the clearer her voice grew. "They sealed the gates with our suffering," Enyalius said inside Halie's thoughts while they crossed a frozen canyon beneath shattered moons. "They called it holy." Halie did not answer aloud. She had stopped trying hours earlier after Vale gave her a deeply concerned look and asked who she was speaking to. "Did you volunteer?" Halie asked silently now. For a long time only wind answered. Then came the reply. "I loved them." The simple sadness in those words hurt more than fury ever could. By the third night, the sanctuary tower dominated the horizon completely. Up close it looked less like architecture and more like a wound forced into existence. The black stone walls stretched impossibly high, disappearing into storm clouds filled with silver lightning. Enormous chains thicker than castles wrapped around the structure from top to bottom. Some had snapped already. Halie counted. At least 7 broken links scattered across the surrounding valleys like fallen mountains. At the tower's base stood colossal gates covered in carvings worn nearly smooth by age. Women's faces. Hundreds of them. Some serene. Some screaming. Some weeping blood. "Gods," the Rose whispered as they approached through the snow. Seraphel shook her head slowly. "No. Martyrs." The air around the sanctuary vibrated constantly with power. Halie's skin burned the closer they came. By the time they reached the outer courtyard, she could barely stand upright. Every instinct inside her screamed recognition. Home. Prison. Grave. All at once. Vale noticed her swaying and caught her elbow before she collapsed. You look terrible again. You keep saying that like it's new information. Usually I enjoy being right more. He glanced uneasily toward the massive gates ahead. Still time to turn around. No, I know. The courtyard surrounding the sanctuary had once been beautiful. Halie could still see traces of ancient gardens buried beneath snowdrifts and cracked marble pathways. Broken statues lined the approach toward the gates, all depicting celestial women holding silver flames in their hands. Most had been deliberately defaced. Heads shattered. Faces scraped away. One statue remained intact near the entrance. A young woman with long braided hair kneeling beside a wounded creature made from stars. Halie stopped walking immediately. That's her, she whispered. Seraphel approached the statue slowly. Elara before the imprisonment. The ancient goddess looked heartbreakingly gentle, carved in stone. Not a warrior. Not a fanatic. Just kind. Halie suddenly hated heaven with fresh intensity. Enyalius had gone strangely silent since arriving at the sanctuary. She noticed him staring at the damaged statues with growing horror. Finally she understood why. You didn't know, she said quietly. He looked toward her sharply. Know what? What the gods really did here. His jaw tightened painfully. No, the admission sounded almost ashamed. The histories described the daughters as honored guardians. Vale laughed bitterly. History is written by cowards with temples. Before anyone could continue, the colossal sanctuary gates began opening on their own. The sound echoed across the frozen valleys like grinding bones. Silver light poured outward through the widening gap. Then came the voice. Not inside Halie's mind this time. Everywhere. Come inside, child. Elara sounded exhausted beyond mortal understanding. Yet beneath the exhaustion waited something dangerous now. They entered cautiously. The interior of the sanctuary resembled a cathedral drowned in moonlight. Endless silver flames burned along towering walls covered in ancient murals. Halie slowed repeatedly to study them as they walked deeper inside. The murals showed celestial daughters throughout history descending willingly beneath the world. Each carried silver chains wrapped around their wrists. Some were surrounded by grieving families. Others walked entirely alone. One mural near the center of the corridor showed Elara herself kneeling before a circle of gods while black gates towered behind her. Halie stopped breathing when she recognized one of the figures standing among the gods. Enyalius. Or someone wearing his face. She stepped closer. No. Not Enyalius. Similar features but older somehow, sterner. Who is that? She asked quietly. Seraphel's expression darkened beneath the veil. Astarion. Enyalius went rigid. My father. Halie stared at him. Your father was here? He vanished before I was born. Enyalius moved toward the mural slowly like a man approaching his own grave. The histories claimed he died during the First Devourer War. Seraphel remained silent too long. Then she said carefully, that was not entirely false. Halie turned toward her sharply. Meaning? Before Seraphel could answer, the entire sanctuary trembled violently. Cracks spread across the silver floor beneath them. A scream echoed from somewhere deep below the tower. Not Elara this time. Something else. Hungry. Ancient. The devourers were pushing harder against the weakening seal. We're out of time, Seraphel said. The prison chamber lies beneath the sanctuary. They descended through spiraling stairways carved directly into black stone. The deeper they traveled, the colder the air became until every breath crystallized visibly before them. Strange whispers drifted through the corridors now. Not seductive like before. Desperate. Begging. Halie realized with horror they were hearing echoes from the imprisoned daughters themselves lingering within the walls. Some voices prayed. Others cursed the gods openly. One only repeated the same sentence over and over. I want to go home. By the time they reached the final chamber, even Vale looked shaken. The room beyond the last doors stretched enormous and circular beneath a ceiling lost in darkness above. At the chamber's center stood the gates imprisoning the devourers. Halie's knees nearly gave out at the sight. The gates were colossal beyond comprehension, forged from silver and black metal intertwined like chains wrapped around a wound. Cracks pulsed across their surface where darkness leaked through. Countless hands pressed outward from the other side. And before those gates, bound by thousands of glowing chains anchored into the floor itself, knelt Elara. Silence consumed the chamber. Halie stared at the ancient goddess, unable to breathe properly. Elara looked nothing like the terrifying force she imagined. She looked tired. So impossibly tired. Her hair, once silver perhaps, now hung dull and tangled around her body, reaching the floor in enormous waves. Ancient scars covered her bare arms where chains bit deep into flesh. Her white robes had faded almost gray with age. Yet even weakened beyond belief, power radiated from her so intensely the chamber vibrated with it. Slowly Elara lifted her head. Her face mirrored Halie's own so strongly it felt like staring into a future twisted by grief. The same eyes. The same mouth. Only older. Broken differently. You came, Elara whispered. Tears filled Halie's eyes immediately without understanding why. Then Elara looked beyond her. Toward Enyalius. The ancient goddess froze completely. For the first time emotion stronger than exhaustion crossed her face. Horror. No, Elara breathed. Every chain in the chamber suddenly rattled violently. Silver fire erupted around the prison gates. No, Enyalius stepped forward instinctively. What is it? Elara stared at him like someone witnessing a ghost rise from the dead. Astarion. Confusion crossed Enyalius's face instantly. That was my father's name. Elara's expression shattered completely. She began laughing suddenly. Not joy. The sound of sanity cracking after 6,000 years of pressure. Of course, she whispered through the laughter. Of course he had children. Halie felt cold dread spreading through her stomach. Elara? The ancient goddess looked toward her again with tears streaming silently down her face. Child, she whispered. The man who condemned me beneath this prison, her gaze shifted back toward Enyalius. Was his father. Silence hit the chamber like a blade. Enyalius went utterly still. Even the devourers behind the gates seemed to pause their clawing. Then Elara smiled faintly through tears that never stopped falling. Tell me, she said softly to Enyalius. Did he ever mention the woman he buried alive to save heaven? No one moved. The prison chamber remained suspended in terrible stillness except for the slow grinding of the devourer gates behind Elara. Black hands continued pressing through the widening cracks while silver chains rattled endlessly around the ancient goddess's body. Enyalius looked as though someone had driven a spear directly through his chest. Halie had seen him wounded, furious, grieving, even broken. She had never seen him look truly lost until now. My father, his voice came rough and uncertain. You knew Astarion? Elara laughed again softly, though the sound held no humor at all. Knew him? Her eyes glistened with ancient sorrow. I loved him. The chamber seemed to tilt beneath Halie's feet. Vale muttered something under his breath that sounded like a curse aimed at the entire history of heaven. Seraphel closed her eyes briefly as though confirming a fear she had carried for years. Enyalius took another step forward before stopping himself. The histories said Astarion died defending the celestial gates. Histories, Elara whispered bitterly. Such beautiful lies. One of the enormous chains around her wrists shifted with a metallic groan as she lifted trembling hands toward Enyalius's face.
Not touching. Just looking.
You have his eyes, she murmured. Gods help me, even your anger feels familiar. Halie watched Enyalius struggle for words and realized something deeply unsettling. He resembled a frightened child standing before Elara despite being one of the most feared beings in creation. The war god swallowed hard.
What happened here? Elara's expression changed instantly.
The softness vanished beneath old pain sharp enough to cut stone.
Heaven happened.
Silver fire flared violently around the chains anchoring her to the floor. The murals along the chamber walls suddenly ignited with moving light. Halie gasped as the ancient paintings began replaying living memories across the stone itself. She saw Elara standing beside Astarion beneath golden skies long before the prison existed. They looked impossibly happy.
Astarion laughed while braiding silver flowers into Elara's hair. Another memory followed.
The two of them arguing before a celestial council. Gods seated on towering thrones while the devourer war raged beyond heaven's gates. Then came the final memory. Elara kneeling willingly before the prison while Astarion held her face in trembling hands. I'll bring you back, he whispered desperately.
I swear it.
Elara smiled through tears.
Then make them remember I was human first. The memory shattered. Silence returned.
Halie felt sick. Enyalius stared at the walls as though the images physically wounded him.
He promised to free you, he said quietly.
Elara's smile twisted into something unbearable.
Yes.
Her eyes darkened.
Then he failed.
The chains tightened around her arms suddenly as if reacting to her anger. Black cracks spread across the prison gates behind her. A monstrous roar echoed through the chamber.
Seraphel stepped forward urgently. Elara, the seal is collapsing. I know.
Then help us stabilize it. Elara slowly turned her gaze toward Seraphel.
Why? The question silenced everyone.
The devourers will destroy creation, Seraphel answered carefully.
And creation deserves saving?
Elara's voice sharpened suddenly.
Tell me, Morning Court, how many daughters did heaven bury after me? Seraphel hesitated too long. Elara laughed bitterly. Enough that you cannot answer quickly.
The chamber trembled harder now.
More cracks spread across the gates.
Halie realized with horror that Elara's emotions directly affected the seal itself. Every surge of grief or rage weakened the prison further.
You're angry, Halie said softly. Elara looked toward her again. I am exhausted.
The older goddess's voice broke slightly.
Do you know what 6,000 years feels like? Silver chains shifted around her body like living things.
I listened to civilizations rise and vanish while this prison fed on my sorrow. I heard children born, kingdoms burning, oceans changing.
And all the while heaven called me sacred.
Her expression hardened into something terrifyingly calm.
Do you know how long it takes before martyrdom becomes hatred? No one answered.
Because everyone understood the truth buried inside her words.
Halie stepped closer. Despite Veil's visible alarm.
Elara, no, the ancient goddess shook her head immediately.
Do not pity me, child. They will do the same to you if allowed. Halie stopped only a few feet away now. Up close she could see the true horror of the chains binding Elara.
They were embedded beneath her skin.
Rooted directly into bone.
Some pulsed with silver light like veins forced outside the body. I won't let them, Halie whispered. Elara stared at her silently for several moments.
Then something softened unexpectedly in her expression. You already speak differently than I did. Good. A faint laugh escaped Elara. Small. Genuine.
Perhaps.
Behind them, Enyalius finally found his voice again. My father loved you.
Elara closed her eyes briefly.
Yes. Then why didn't he come back?
The question hung heavily through the chamber.
Elara opened her eyes slowly. Because heaven killed him. Silence detonated. Halie looked sharply toward Enyalius. He had gone completely pale. What? Elara's chains rattled violently again as old fury surfaced. Estiarian tried breaking the prison 3 centuries after my binding. The silver flames around the chamber surged higher. The Celestial Council called it treason. Enyalius shook his head automatically. No, he nearly succeeded. Elara's voice cracked with grief. He tore apart half the sanctuary before they stopped him. Halie felt cold horror settle inside her chest. Who killed him? Elara looked directly at Enyalius. The gods he served. The war god staggered backward like the truth physically struck him. Memories clearly crashed behind his eyes all at once. Halie realized suddenly why Enyalius hated celestial politics so instinctively. Why he distrusted councils. Why rage came easier to him than obedience. Somewhere deep down, perhaps he always sensed the corruption surrounding his father's death. They told me he died defending heaven, he whispered. That part was true, Elara replied quietly. He died defending what heaven should have been. The prison gates groaned louder behind her. One of the cracks split wide enough for black mist to pour through. Immediately the chamber temperature dropped sharply. The devourers sensed weakness now. Seraphel moved urgently toward the gates while mourning court members began reinforcing failing wards. We're losing containment. Elara barely glanced behind her. Eventually you always do. Elara. Halie's voice cut through the chamber sharply enough to make the ancient goddess look back. If you wanted revenge, you could have let the gates open already. Silence followed. Halie stepped closer still. But you didn't. Elara's composure flickered for the first time. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. The older goddess stared at her for a very long time. Then, slowly, she whispered, I don't know who I am anymore. The admission hurt more than anger would have. Halie saw it clearly now beneath all the ancient power and fury. Elara was afraid. Not of the devourers. Of herself. 6,000 years trapped between sacrifice and hatred had eroded the boundary between martyr and monster. Another violent tremor ripped through the chamber. Several chains anchoring Elara snapped instantly. The sound echoed like thunder. Seraphel turned sharply. The prison can't hold much longer. Blackness surged visibly behind the gates now. Countless eyes opened within the cracks staring directly toward Halie. The whispers returned instantly. Daughter of sorrow. Open the way. Enyalius moved beside Halie immediately, spear igniting. Don't listen. But Halie barely heard him. She was watching Elara instead. Watching the ancient goddess struggle against emotions powerful enough to destroy worlds. Then she understood something terrifying. The seal no longer depended solely on Elara's suffering. It was shifting toward Halie now. The prison recognized another grieving daughter. Another possible replacement. Elara realized it too. Horror crossed her face instantly. No, the remaining chains around her body tightened violently. No, I won't allow it. Silver light erupted outward from Elara with catastrophic force. Everyone in the chamber staggered backward except Halie. The ancient goddess's eyes blazed like stars now. Listen carefully, Elara said, voice echoing with divine power. The prison wants succession. It always has. Another chain snapped. Every aged searches for another daughter broken enough to carry the burden willingly. Halie's blood ran cold. That's why it called me. Yes. Elara looked devastated by the answer. It recognizes your grief. Vale stepped closer protectively. Then we destroy the prison. Seraphel stared at him like he'd suggested detonating the sun. Without the seal, the devourers consume reality. And with it? Vale snapped. We continue feeding women into eternal torment? No one had an answer. Because there wasn't one. The gates behind Elora suddenly bulged outward violently. Something enormous struck them from the other side. Cracks raced across the silver metal. The chamber shook. Hard enough to collapse entire sections of ceiling. Halie heard screams echoing distantly from higher within the sanctuary. The tower itself was failing. "It's happening," Seraphel whispered. Elora closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, resolve had replaced fear. "Then we end it properly." Before anyone could react, the ancient goddess thrust both chained hands toward Halie. Silver light exploded between them. Halie screamed as memories not her own flooded violently into her mind. She saw Elora's entire imprisonment in unbearable detail. Centuries chained alone beneath the world. Endless conversations with devourers whispering through the dark. The slow realization that heaven had no intention of freeing her. The moment Asterion died trying to save her. The first time hatred felt easier than hope. Halie collapsed to her knees, gasping beneath the weight of 6,000 years of suffering pouring into her consciousness. "Stop!" Enyalius shouted. Elora ignored him. Tears streamed down her face now. "You deserve truth before choice," she whispered toward Halie. "Not lies disguised as duty." More memories flooded through Halie. The celestial councils debating which daughters possessed suitable temperaments for sacrifice. Priests calling torment divine necessity. Entire bloodlines bred quietly over generations to create future vessels strong enough to survive the prison. Halie's bloodline. Rage exploded through her so intensely the chamber lights shattered. "They bred us," she whispered in horror. Elora nodded once. "Yes." The prison gates cracked open another inch. Black limbs began forcing through. Yet no one moved because the revelation had hollowed the chamber into silence. Halie stared at Enyalius through tears and fury and unbearable grief. "Did you know?" His expression broke completely. No, she believed him instantly. That somehow hurt worse. Then Elora spoke the final truth. "Your child would have inherited the same blood." Halie stopped breathing. The ancient goddess looked shattered, saying the words. Eventually heaven would have come for them too. Silence consumed the prison chamber entirely. Even the devourers seemed to pause. Then something inside Halie changed forever. Not into darkness. Not into vengeance. Into clarity sharp enough to cut through centuries of lies. Heaven had never protected daughters like her. It had manufactured them. Used them. Buried them. And somewhere deep within the cracking prison beneath reality, the devourers began laughing. Wall instinctively. The stranger studied her in silence. "You look disappointed," he remarked finally. His voice sounded smooth and strangely amused. "Most prisoners are grateful during rescues." "I didn't ask for one." "No," he agreed. "But I did." He stepped inside carefully, avoiding the blood stains surrounding her chains. "My name is Vale." Halie laughed bitterly despite herself. "A demon prince. Former prince technically. Family politics became unpleasant." "Wonderful." Vale crouched beside her broken shackles, expression unreadable. "I came because your suffering has become inconvenient." "For who?" "For me." He glanced toward the burning corridor. "The balance between realms weakens whenever innocent divine blood is tortured unjustly. Your pain is tearing holes into the abyss." Halie stared at him suspiciously. "Why would a demon care?" "Because creatures far worse than demons live beneath the abyss," Vale answered softly. "And your grief is feeding them." Another explosion shook the prison. Dust rained from the ceiling. Vale extended one clawed hand toward her. "Come with me, Halie. Heaven has already decided what you are. The abyss may offer something different." She should have refused. Everything she had ever learned warned against trusting demons. Yet when Halie looked into his eyes, she saw no lust, pity, or manipulation. Only exhaustion that mirrored her own. Slowly, painfully, she took his hand. Darkness swallowed them both as the prison collapsed behind them. Halie expected the abyss to smell like rotten fire and endless death, but the first thing she noticed after the darkness released her was rain. Cold silver rain drifted through enormous black trees whose leaves glimmered faintly blue under a sky with no stars. Mountains rose in the distance like jagged teeth, yet rivers of pale light wound peacefully through the valleys below them. Strange creatures moved through the mist without threatening her: thin deer with translucent antlers, birds made from curling smoke, silent figures cloaked in moss who vanished whenever she tried looking directly at them. Halie stood frozen beside the cliff edge while rain soaked her tangled hair and prison rags. "This is the abyss?" she asked hoarsely. Vale brushed ash from his sleeves. "Disappointed? It isn't what priests described. Priests also claim demons eat infants." He glanced toward her. "Most of us prefer wine." Despite everything, a broken laugh escaped her throat. The sound startled them both. Vale watched her carefully after that, as if the laugh revealed something fragile he had not expected to survive. They traveled for days through the lower valleys. Halie remained weak from imprisonment, and several times her legs collapsed beneath her without warning. Vale never mocked her exhaustion. He simply waited in silence whenever she needed rest. At night he built small blue fires that gave off warmth without smoke. He hunted strange silver fish from underground streams and showed her how to eat the glowing roots that grew beneath the cliffs. Slowly her body began recovering, though the scars across her wrists and spine remained. The deeper wound inside her refused healing altogether. During one storm they sheltered inside the ruins of an ancient temple carved directly into obsidian stone. Rain thundered outside while Vale sharpened a curved dagger near the fire. Halie sat wrapped in a thick cloak he had stolen from somewhere during their journey. She had not asked where. "Why were you imprisoned?" she asked suddenly. Vale's blade paused. "You first." Halie stared into the flames for several moments before answering. "I loved someone who chose another woman." "That alone earned torture?" No, her fingers tightened around the cloak. "He believed I betrayed him." Vale resumed sharpening the dagger. "Did you?" "Never." "Then he was a fool." The simplicity of the answer hit her harder than sympathy would have. Halie swallowed thickly. "And you?" she asked. Vale leaned back against the temple wall. Firelight flickered across the silver markings on his throat. "My father ruled the ninth house of the abyss. He believed fear was the only law worth respecting." "And you disagreed?" "I murdered him." Halie blinked. Vale noticed her expression and smirked faintly. "You were expecting a tragic misunderstanding?" "A little." "No misunderstanding. He fed servants to hounds for entertainment." Vale slid the dagger into its sheath. "One night I grew tired of listening to the screams." Halie studied him differently after that conversation. There was violence in him, undeniably, but it moved with restraint rather than hunger. He carried brutality the way exhausted soldiers carried old injuries. Sometimes during travel she caught him staring at distant shadows with quiet vigilance, as if expecting enemies to emerge from the dark at any moment. Other times he disappeared for hours without explanation and returned splattered with black blood that did not belong to him. She stopped asking questions after the third time. Eventually they reached the city of Noctisvale, capital of the Upper Abyss. The sight stole Halie's breath completely. Towers of dark crystal rose from enormous cliffs above glowing rivers. Bridges woven from silver chains connected floating palaces suspended in the air by magic older than the heavens themselves. Markets crowded the streets below, filled with creatures from dozens of realms, demons bargaining beside exiled gods, masked sorcerers selling bottled memories, warriors carrying weapons forged from dragon bones. Music drifted through the night from unseen taverns. Lanterns floated overhead like captive stars. "This place should not exist," Halie whispered. "Most beautiful things shouldn't," Vale replied. The city reacted strangely to her presence. Conversation stopped whenever she passed. Demons stared openly at the scars on her wrists. Some bowed their heads respectfully after sensing divine blood beneath her ruined aura. Others looked afraid. One old merchant woman grabbed Halie's hand unexpectedly in the market and pressed her forehead against her knuckles. "The grieving goddess walks among us at last," she murmured. Halie pulled away uneasily. "I'm not a goddess." The woman's cloudy eyes lifted toward her. "Not yet." Vale immediately led Halie away before more questions followed. What did she mean? Halie demanded once they entered a quieter street. Vale's jaw tightened slightly. Prophecies spread quickly here. What prophecy? An old abyssal legend claims a broken daughter of heaven will either destroy the gates between realms or seal them forever. That sounds absurd. Most prophecies are. He avoided her gaze. Still, people become nervous around symbols. Halie should have left then. She knew it. Every instinct warned her the abyss had plans she did not understand. Yet she had nowhere else to go. Heaven considered her a traitor. Astravale had abandoned her years ago. Even the memory of Enyalius felt poisoned now, tangled together with blood and grief until thinking about him physically hurt. So she remained beside Vale. Weeks turned into months. For the first time since imprisonment, Halie slowly relearned ordinary life. She rented a small apartment overlooking the river district while working as a healer for wounded travelers and laborers. At first the citizens of Noctis Vale distrusted divine healing magic. That changed after Halie saved a dockworker's daughter from a soul fever epidemic spreading through the lower streets. Word traveled quickly afterward. Demons lined outside her clinic carrying injured children, cursed lovers, dying elders. Halie treated them all without judgment. One afternoon she noticed a little boy hiding behind his mother while clutching a wooden toy soldier. The child had tiny horns curling from his forehead and one badly burned arm. When Halie touched the wound, he flinched violently. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. "Everything hurts," he whispered. The words shattered something inside her. She spent 6 hours rebuilding the ruined flesh in his arm using healing magic so advanced it left her trembling from exhaustion afterward. The boy returned 3 days later carrying flowers stolen from somebody's garden. After that, others began calling her the Lantern Saint of Noctis Vale. Vale found the title hilarious. "You realize saints rarely survive long here," he informed her while lounging across her clinic window one evening. Halie rolled bandages without looking up. "You're still alive." "I'm not saintly." "You rescued a tortured stranger from heaven." "I rescued a walking catastrophe because reality was unraveling." "Very noble distinction." Vale smirked, but the expression faded when he noticed fresh bruises beneath her sleeves. "Who did that?" Halie instinctively pulled the fabric down. "Nobody." His eyes narrowed dangerously. "Halie." She exhaled slowly. "Sometimes when I sleep, I remember the prison." Silence settled between them. Vale stepped away from the window and crouched beside her chair. "Nightmares?" "Memories." Her voice cracked unexpectedly. "I hear them taking my child every time I close my eyes." Vale did not offer meaningless comfort. Instead he removed one black leather glove and pressed his palm lightly against hers. His skin felt strangely warm for a demon. "In the abyss," he said quietly, "pain shared between souls weakens." Halie frowned through tears. "That sounds suspiciously poetic." "It's actual magic." "Oh. Would you like to try?" She hesitated before nodding. Crimson light flickered faintly between their joined hands. At first nothing happened. Then suddenly the pressure crushing her chest eased slightly, as if invisible chains had loosened around her ribs. Vale inhaled sharply instead. His expression tightened with real pain. Halie tried pulling away immediately. "Stop." He held her hand firmly. "Wait." She realized then that he was carrying part of the grief for her. Not removing it. Sharing it. No prayer from heaven had ever felt so kind. From that night onward something delicate changed between them. Not romance at first. Trust.
Vale began lingering at the clinic long after sunset, repairing broken shelves or silently guarding the door during dangerous nights in the lower district. Halie started cooking for him despite his repeated claims demons barely needed food. She discovered he secretly loved honeycakes and terrible gambling games. He discovered she sang quietly while organizing herbs, though she immediately stopped whenever he mentioned it. Sometimes they argued fiercely about politics between realms. Other nights they sat together on the rooftop overlooking Noctis Vale while distant thunder rolled across the mountains. Neither spoke much during those moments. The silence became comfortable instead of painful. Then heaven found her. The attack came during the festival of Holomoons, when the streets overflowed with masked dancers and floating lanterns. Halie was returning from the market carrying medicine bundles when divine arrows suddenly exploded through the crowd. Screams erupted everywhere. A demon beside her lost half his skull instantly. 3 armored warriors descended from the rooftops wearing the silver insignia of heaven's execution order. By decree of the celestial throne, one shouted, "Halie of Astravale is condemned for treason against the gods." Panic surged through the festival. Civilians scattered in every direction while more soldiers emerged from portals overhead. Halie barely dodged the next arrow before it shattered a stone pillar behind her. "Move," someone roared. Vale crashed into the battlefield from above, black wings erupting behind him as he landed between Halie and the assassins. The street exploded beneath the impact. Halie stared in shock. She had never seen his true form before. Massive horns curved back from his skull, like polished obsidian. Crimson fire burned beneath his skin through cracks glowing across his arms. The nearest executioner charged immediately with a divine spear. Vale caught the weapon barehanded and snapped it in half before driving his fist straight through the man's chest. Chaos consumed the festival. Demons transformed around them. Abyssal guards flooded the streets. Celestial magic collided against black fire while civilians fled through collapsing market stalls. Halie grabbed a wounded child trapped beneath burning debris and dragged him clear seconds before another explosion tore apart the bridge overhead. "Halie!" Vale shouted. She turned just in time to see 2 executioners descending toward her simultaneously. One carried chains designed specifically for divine prisoners. Terror froze her body for half a heartbeat because she recognized those chains. Prison memories slammed into her mind. Cold walls. Blood. Her child screaming. Then rage erupted instead. Pure, volcanic rage she had suppressed for years. Silver light exploded outward from her body so violently every window across the street shattered at once. The executioners screamed as divine force hurled them backward through stone buildings. The entire district fell silent. Even Vale stared at her in stunned disbelief. Halie herself looked down at her glowing hands, breathing hard. She had never possessed that kind of power before. Somewhere far beneath the city, something ancient answered her anger with a low, awakening roar. The roar rolled upward through the foundations of Noctis Vale like a living earthquake. Towers trembled. Lanterns burst across the sky. Every demon in the street immediately dropped to one knee except Vale, whose expression shifted from shock to genuine alarm. Halie felt the sound inside her bones rather than hearing it with her ears, as though some colossal creature deep beneath the abyss had opened one ancient eye and noticed her existence for the first time. The silver light around her hands flickered uncontrollably. Cracks spread through the cobblestones under her feet. "Halie," Vale said carefully, "you need to calm down." "What was that?" she whispered. Another tremor shook the district before suddenly stopping. In the silence afterward came distant screams from the upper bridges where celestial soldiers still battled abyssal guards. Smoke drifted overhead. Somewhere nearby a building collapsed into the glowing river below. Vale grabbed Halie's wrist. "We leave now. The civilians will survive if the city doesn't split in half." He pulled her through the chaos before she could argue further. They moved across hidden alleyways while demons bowed their heads as Halie passed, some with reverence, others with fear. The reaction unsettled her more than the attack itself. When they finally reached the abandoned watchtower overlooking the northern cliffs, Vale sealed the doors behind them with black fire and turned toward her with an expression she had never seen before: uncertainty.
"Tell me exactly what you felt," he demanded.
Halie leaned against the stone wall, still breathing hard.
"Anger. Before that."
She closed her eyes briefly.
"Like, something answered me." Vale cursed under his breath. "You know what it was." "I know what it might be." "Then explain."
He hesitated long enough to confirm her worst fears. "At the bottom of the abyss," he said quietly, "there is a sealed realm older than heaven itself. The first gods imprisoned creatures there after a war nobody speaks about anymore."
Halie folded her arms tightly.
"What creatures?"
"The Devourers." Even the name seemed to darken the room. Vale walked toward the narrow window overlooking the city.
"They consume divine energy.
Souls. Entire realms if released fully. The prison holding them closed was forged using the grief and sacrifice of celestial bloodlines."
Halie stared at him slowly. "You think my suffering affected the seal?" "I think 3 years of torturing an innocent half-goddess whose child was murdered may have damaged forces the heavens were too arrogant to understand." She wanted to dismiss the idea as madness. Instead she remembered the old merchant woman calling her the grieving goddess. She remembered the roar answering her rage.
"Why didn't you tell me sooner?"
"Because you already carried enough pain." Vale looked back at her grimly. "And because if certain factions in the abyss believe you can control the prison below, they'll either worship you or cut you open to study how." Before Halie could respond, a pulse of divine energy flashed across the horizon outside.
Vale's face hardened instantly.
"No," he rushed toward the window. Halie followed and felt cold dread flood her chest.
Far above Noctis Vale, golden light had appeared in the clouds.
Massive war banners unfurled across the sky while celestial armies emerged from enormous gates of fire. Thousands of armored soldiers descended in formation.
At their center stood a figure Halie recognized immediately even from impossible distance. Enyalius had come to the abyss.
He wore armor darker than she remembered, edged in crimson instead of gold. His presence alone distorted the storm clouds surrounding him. The god of war hovered above the city with a spear blazing in his hand while celestial dragons circled behind him. The citizens below erupted into panic. Bells rang throughout Noctis Vale.
Vale's jaw tightened. He brought an invasion force. Halie could not speak.
3 years of hatred and grief collapsed inward beneath the simple shock of seeing him again. Even from afar she could tell he had changed. Enyalius no longer carried the calm confidence of the man she once loved. Rage radiated from him like heat from wildfire. His face looked sharper, exhausted, almost haunted. Then his gaze swept across the city below and stopped directly on her. The distance between them vanished in that instant. Halie felt it physically. Every memory returned at once, his hands trembling during sleepless nights, the warmth of his chest beneath her cheek, the sound of his voice promising he would protect her forever. Immediately afterward came the prison.
The chains. The blood. Their child dying alone in darkness.
Her stomach twisted violently.
Enyalius disappeared from the sky.
A sonic boom split the clouds apart. Vale moved in front of Halie barely 1 second before Enyalius crashed through the tower wall like divine wrath itself. Stone exploded across the chamber. Halie stumbled backward while dust filled the air. Enyalius landed hard enough to crack the floor beneath him, spear pointed directly at Vale's throat.
"Move away from her," he said.
His voice sounded deeper than before, roughened by sleepless fury.
Vale smiled coldly despite the weapon inches from his neck.
"You're trespassing." Enyalius ignored him completely. His eyes remained locked on Halie. For several long seconds neither moved.
Halie hated herself for noticing how thin he looked.
How the scar across his ribs had never fully healed. How his hands shook almost imperceptibly around the spear. "Halie," he breathed. Hearing him say her name again after years felt like reopening a wound with bare fingers. She forced herself to stand straighter.
You found me. I searched every realm. His gaze swept across the scars visible above her collar. Something savage flickered across his face. What did they do to you? The question nearly made her laugh from disbelief. You sentenced me. I sentenced you to confinement until investigation. His voice cracked with restrained fury. Not torture. Vale spoke before Halie could answer. Then perhaps you should supervise your priests more carefully. Enyalius finally looked at him fully. Murder entered the room. You, he said softly. Vale folded his arms. Me. The war god's power surged violently. I should tear your spine out. Join the line. Halie stepped between them before the tower exploded from their combined rage. Enough. Both men fell silent immediately. The realization irritated her further. You don't get to arrive here threatening people after disappearing for 3 years, she told Enyalius. Pain flashed across his expression. I didn't know where you were. You never came to see the prison. They told me you refused visitors. And you believed them? Enyalius opened his mouth. Closed it again. That hesitation answered everything. Halie laughed once, bitter and exhausted. Of course you did. He took a step toward her carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. Halie, listen to me. The evidence against you was overwhelming. But after you disappeared, things stopped making sense. Relics kept vanishing. Priests began dying mysteriously. Lyessa, at her sister's name, something dark crossed his face. She betrayed us both. Halie's heartbeat slowed dangerously. What happened? Enyalius looked away for the first time. I discovered the truth 8 months ago. 8 months. Thamiel confessed before he died. And Lyessa? Silence. Vale answered instead after reading Enyalius's expression. Dead, I assume. The war god did not deny it. Halie stared at him in disbelief. You killed her? No, his jaw tightened. I executed her. The coldness in his voice frightened even her. Enyalius lowered his spear slowly. She admitted everything. The false evidence. The prison torture. The child. His composure shattered slightly on the last word. Halie, the grief in his eyes looked horrifyingly genuine now. I didn't know about the baby. She turned away immediately because suddenly she could not breathe properly. For years she had imagined this moment, imagined screaming at him, imagined watching guilt destroy him. Instead she felt only exhaustion. Please leave, she whispered. Enyalius stepped closer. I can't. You can. I love you. Vale made a disgusted sound somewhere behind them, but Halie barely heard it. The words struck her like physical force because once upon a time they would have meant everything. Now they only hurt. She faced him again slowly. Do you know what prison felt like? She asked quietly. Enyalius said nothing. At first I kept waiting for you to come. Her voice remained calm, which somehow made it worse. Every time footsteps approached my cell, I thought it would be you. The war god's face had gone completely pale. Then they took our child. Silence consumed the ruined tower. After that, Halie continued, I stopped loving you because loving you was the only thing making the pain unbearable. Enyalius looked as though she had driven a blade directly through his chest. For one terrible second she almost pitied him. Then he reached toward her instinctively. Halie flinched backward without meaning to. The movement destroyed him more completely than any accusation could have. His hand froze in midair. Vale noticed too. The demon prince stepped quietly beside Halie, not possessively, simply present. Enyalius's eyes immediately locked onto the gesture. You touched him willingly, he said. Something dangerous entered the room then, not anger exactly, but realization. Enyalius studied the way Halie unconsciously leaned slightly toward Vale after flinching away from him. He noticed how naturally Vale positioned himself near her without blocking her freedom. Small things. Intimate things.
The war god's expression darkened with dawning horror.
What is he to you? Halie answered before Vale could. Someone who stayed. The silence afterward felt endless.
Outside the shattered tower, war horns echoed across Noctis Vale while celestial armies prepared for battle against the abyss below. Yet inside the ruined chamber, none of them moved. Enyalius stared at Halie as if realizing for the first time that he might truly have lost her forever. Then, far beneath the city, the ancient roar sounded again, much louder this time. The floor split open down the center of the tower. Black light erupted upward from the crack while screams rose across Noctis Vale in the distance.
Vale's expression changed instantly from tension to alarm. The seal is breaking. The black light pouring through the cracked floor did not behave like ordinary illumination.
It moved like liquid smoke crawling upward in twisting streams, swallowing color from everything it touched.
Stone blackened instantly.
The air turned heavy enough to choke on. Halie felt the pressure inside her skull before she understood what was happening. Thousands of voices whispered beneath the roar now, overlapping in languages older than mortal memory.
Hungry. Endless. Enyalius reacted first.
He slammed the butt of his spear against the fractured floor and golden fire exploded through the tower, forcing the darkness back several feet.
The entire structure shook violently.
Everyone outside the district is dead if that spreads, he snapped. Vale crouched beside the widening crack, crimson energy burning along his hands as he studied the leaking void beneath them. For the first time since Halie met him, genuine fear crossed his face.
Not dead, he said grimly.
Worse.
Another pulse erupted upward. This time shapes moved inside the darkness, long skeletal limbs unfolding briefly before vanishing again.
Halie stumbled backward instinctively. The whispers sharpened. She could suddenly understand fragments of them.
Daughter. Open the gate. Come below. Don't listen, Vale ordered immediately, hearing her breathing change.
Halie pressed both hands against her temples.
They're talking to me.
Enyalius looked at her sharply.
What are they saying? I don't know. That was partly true. She did know. The voices were not asking for release.
They were promising things.
Revenge. Power.
The return of what she lost.
One whisper
sounded horrifyingly like a child crying in darkness. Her knees nearly buckled.
Enyalius caught her automatically before she fell.
Halie froze the instant his arms wrapped around her. Memory crashed through her senses so violently it hurt.
The scent of iron and cedar on his skin. The warmth of his chest.
Nights spent asleep beside him while storms rolled outside palace windows. For one disorienting heartbeat she almost leaned into him out of pure instinct.
Then prison memories surged behind it.
She jerked away hard enough that Enyalius immediately released her. Pain flickered across his face again, quieter this time.
Controlled.
He was learning not to touch her without permission.
The realization unsettled her more than anger would have. Vale rose abruptly from the crack. We don't have time for this. Can you stop it? Enyalius demanded. Temporarily.
Vale looked toward Halie.
Permanently requires her.
Halie stared at him.
Me?
Your blood opened the damage originally.
Only your power can repair it fully. You said my suffering weakened the seal.
Yes.
Vale hesitated. But the prison itself responds to you now. It recognizes you. Enyalius's expression hardened instantly.
Then she goes nowhere near that thing.
And what's your alternative?
Vale shot back.
Your army marches into the abyss while devourers crawl out beneath the city?
The roar answered him, louder than before. Far across Noctis Vale, black fractures erupted through several towers simultaneously.
Screams echoed through the streets below.
Halie rushed to the shattered window and felt her stomach twist.
Entire districts were falling into darkness.
Shadow creatures poured from cracks in the ground, tall and malformed with glowing mouths stretching across featureless faces. They moved unnaturally fast through the panicked crowds. Celestial soldiers battled them in the streets alongside demons, but ordinary weapons barely slowed the creatures. One monster leapt onto a dragon midair and tore straight through its armored neck before disappearing into smoke again.
"What are those?"
Halie whispered. Vale stepped beside her.
"The first hunger." "That explains nothing. The devourers don't enter reality fully at first. They send fragments." Another explosion shook the city. Enyalius turned toward the tower exit immediately.
"Then we contain the breach before more emerge."
Vale grabbed his arm. "You can't kill this with brute force. Watch me." That attitude is why heaven keeps creating catastrophes. Halie ignored their argument and kept staring at the city below.
Something felt wrong beyond the chaos itself. Then she noticed the pattern. The shadow creatures were not attacking randomly. They were moving toward one location.
The lower river district. Her clinic.
No, Halie sprinted toward the doorway before either man could stop her.
"Halie!" Enyalius caught up instantly, blocking the stairs. "You can't go there. There are children in that district. There are monsters tearing through the streets." "Exactly."
She shoved past him.
Vale swore softly before following both of them down into the burning city.
The journey through Noctisvale became a nightmare of collapsing bridges and blood-soaked alleys.
Demons and celestial warriors fought side by side now out of sheer survival instinct.
Halie healed whoever crossed her path without pausing to ask allegiance. A wounded angel missing both wings. A horned woman shielding two infants beneath a ruined cart. A dying soldier whose shadow had begun peeling away from his body like living tar.
Every street revealed new horrors. Yet through all of it, Enyalius remained terrifyingly effective. Halie had once seen him as a protector during battle. Now she understood why enemies called him the Red Cataclysm. He moved through the shadow creatures like divine execution itself. Spears of golden fire vaporized entire groups at once. When monsters closed in physically, he tore them apart bare-handed with brutality that made even demons recoil. At one intersection, a devourer fragment erupted from beneath the ground directly under Halie. Enyalius reacted before she even saw it. He drove his spear downward through the creature's skull while simultaneously throwing his own body between Halie and the explosion of black energy that followed. The blast shredded the buildings behind them. Enyalius took the full impact across his back without hesitation. "Are you insane?" Halie shouted after he staggered upright again, blood running down one shoulder. "Probably," he admitted hoarsely. "Keep moving." Vale, who had witnessed the exchange silently, gave Enyalius a long unreadable look afterward but said nothing. They reached the river district near midnight. Fires reflected across the glowing water while smoke covered most of the sky. Halie's clinic still stood, though several nearby buildings had collapsed. Survivors crowded inside behind barricaded doors. Relief flooded her chest briefly. Then the river moved. No. Something enormous beneath the river moved. The glowing water bulged upward across the entire canal. Civilians screamed. A colossal shape began rising slowly from the depths beneath the bridge ahead. Black scales. Endless limbs. Eyes opening one by one through the darkness like crimson moons. Even Vale stepped backward. "Impossible," he muttered. "A herald already?" The creature's head emerged fully above the river, towering over the district. It resembled no living thing Halie recognized. Pieces of it constantly shifted shape, horns becoming hands, mouth splitting open across its neck before sealing shut again. The air around it warped visibly. Several nearby civilians simply collapsed unconscious from looking at it too long. Then the monster spoke directly into every mind at once. "Return the broken daughter." Halie felt the words slam through her chest. The creature saw her immediately. Every eye across its body rotated toward her at once. Enyalius stepped in front of her instinctively while celestial fire erupted across his spear. You don't get her. The herald laughed.
The sound resembled bones grinding together underwater.
War god.
Child killer. The words hit harder than physical blows. Enyalius went perfectly still. Halie saw the moment guilt cut into him like a blade.
The creature noticed too. It fed on the weakness instantly.
Your hands built her grief.
Your doubt opened the gate. Enyalius attacked before it could say more.
He launched upward with enough force to crater the street beneath him, spear blazing like a falling star.
The herald met him head-on.
Their collision split the bridge apart.
Shockwaves blasted through the district while civilians fled screaming.
Halie watched in horror as Enyalius drove the creature backward through 3 buildings, only for its shattered flesh to immediately reform around the spear lodged in its chest. Clawed limbs wrapped around him from every direction.
Veil transformed fully beside Halie, black wings unfurling violently. Get the survivors underground, he ordered. Now. What about Enyalius?
He'll survive longer than the rest of us. Veil launched himself into the battle before she could respond.
The district descended into chaos again.
Halie forced herself to focus on the civilians trapped nearby. She organized evacuations through old tunnel systems beneath the market while above them the battle tore apart entire streets. Several times shadow creatures breached the evacuation lines. Each time Halie fought them directly now without hesitation. Silver power surged through her more naturally with every use. She no longer felt like merely a healer. Something sharper was awakening beneath the grief. During the final evacuation, a little girl clung desperately to Halie's robes outside the clinic. My brother's still inside, the child sobbed.
Halie looked toward the burning building.
Parts of the roof had already collapsed inward.
Stay here.
She rushed inside before anyone could stop her. Smoke filled the clinic so thickly she could barely breathe.
Flames crawled across the walls. Hello, she shouted. Where are you?
A weak cry answered from upstairs. Halie climbed through collapsing beams toward the sound until she found a small boy trapped beneath a fallen cabinet. She freed him quickly, but another explosion rocked the building before they could escape.
The staircase collapsed completely. Fire surrounded them on all sides.
The child began crying in panic.
Halie pulled him close instinctively while searching desperately for another exit.
Then the whispers returned.
Stronger now. We can save him. Just open the gate.
She squeezed her eyes shut. No, the fire spread closer. The ceiling groaned overhead. The boy buried his face against her shoulder.
I don't want to die.
The voices pressed harder.
We can return your child too.
Halie froze. Pain lanced through her so sharply she nearly collapsed. For one horrible instant temptation flooded her completely. If the devourers truly possessed power over death. A roar shattered the building wall beside her. Enyalius burst through the flames covered in blood and black ash. Without a word he grabbed both Halie and the child before leaping clear seconds ahead of the entire clinic collapsing behind them. They crashed into the street hard enough to skid across broken stone. The rescued boy immediately ran toward his sister nearby.
Halie barely noticed.
She was staring at Enyalius. One side of his face had been ripped open by claws. Golden blood soaked his ruined armor.
Yet the first thing he asked was, "Are you hurt?" Halie opened her mouth. No answer came.
Then the herald emerged from the smoke behind him, vastly larger than before.
Veil landed nearby as well, breathing hard, one wing badly mangled. We can't kill it, he said. It keeps regenerating from the breach below. The herald's countless eyes fixed on Halie again.
This ends when the grieving goddess chooses.
The streets fell silent around them.
Halie slowly realized both armies were watching now, demons, angels, survivors, monsters.
Waiting.
The herald lifted one enormous claw toward her.
Come below. Claim what was taken from you.
Enyalius stepped protectively in front of Halie despite barely remaining upright.
Don't listen. The herald's mouth split into something resembling a smile.
He fears your answer more than death.
Halie looked at Enyalius then.
Truly looked at him. The unstoppable war god stood wounded and exhausted before impossible horror, yet the terror in his eyes was not for himself. It was for her.
Because part of him believed she might actually accept the offer.
And the terrible truth was that part of her wanted to. The desire arrived quietly, not as madness or corruption but as grief wearing hope's face.
Halie imagined hearing her child laugh somewhere beneath the abyss.
She imagined tiny fingers wrapping around hers again.
One moment. One heartbeat.
That was all it would take to destroy her resolve.
The herald sensed the weakness instantly. Shadows thickened around the streets.
More whispers crawled through the minds of everyone present, promising impossible reunions and forgiven sins.
Several wounded soldiers actually began walking willingly toward the black fractures spreading across the district, eyes vacant with longing.
Vale swore and slashed one unconscious before he stepped into a crack large enough to swallow him whole.
It feeds on regret, the demon prince warned. If people keep listening, the entire city falls.
Halie forced herself to breathe steadily. The herald remained focused only on her now, its endless eyes gleaming like wet wounds across the darkness.
Return what was stolen.
The words cut deeper because the creature sounded almost compassionate. Enyalius moved closer despite blood pouring from the injuries across his chest.
Halie.
She did not look at him. If I could bring our child back, her voice broke for the first time that night. Silence spread outward through the ruined district.
Even the herald waited.
Enyalius closed his eyes briefly. When he answered, his voice sounded raw enough to bleed. I would tear apart creation itself to do it.
Halie finally looked at him then.
He stood amid fire and falling ash, stripped of every mask he once wore as a god.
No throne. No armor of pride. Only unbearable grief.
I didn't know, he whispered. Every day since learning the truth, I've wished the prison had taken me instead. Halie stared at him for several seconds while memories fought against each other inside her mind. The man who held her during storms. The man who failed her when it mattered most. The war god who destroyed kingdoms without hesitation. The broken figure standing before her now with tears
mixing into the blood on his face.
Vale watched both of them carefully from several feet away, unreadable beneath the smoke drifting through the street. Then the herald lunged. One colossal limb erupted toward Halie fast enough to shatter the ground in its path.
Enyalius reacted instantly, throwing himself directly between them.
The claw punched straight through his side before he managed to drive his spear upward into the creature's skull.
Golden fire exploded outward.
The herald shrieked loud enough to crack every surviving window in the district.
Enyalius collapsed to one knee. Halie's entire body went cold at the sight of the wound.
The claw had torn completely through him. Golden blood spread rapidly beneath his armor.
Yet he still tried standing again. Stay, he coughed violently. Behind me. Something inside Halie snapped. Not into darkness this time.
Into fury so pure it burned away hesitation completely. Silver light detonated outward from her body with enough force to flatten everyone nearby.
The herald recoiled. Halie stepped forward while power surged around her like a rising storm.
Her scars glowed brilliantly across her skin. Above the city, the clouds themselves began rotating slowly around her presence.
You want grief, she said to the herald. Then look at me. The creature froze. For the first time since emerging, it looked uncertain. Halie lifted one hand.
Every black fracture across the district suddenly halted its expansion. The whispers faltered.
Even Vale stared in shock now. Halie herself barely understood what she was doing.
It felt instinctive, ancient, buried inside her blood long before birth.
The herald's mouth twisted violently. She awakens. Far beneath the abyss, something answered with another roar. This one carried rage instead of hunger. The entire city shook.
Then the ground split open directly beneath the herald itself. Massive silver chains erupted upward from the depths and wrapped around the creature's limbs. The herald screamed as the chains began dragging it downward inch by inch. Halie's raised arm trembled violently with the effort. Visions flashed through her mind uncontrollably. She saw ancient gods forging prisons beneath reality. She saw celestial daughters sacrificed willingly to power the seals. She saw oceans of black creatures clawing against barriers made from divine sorrow. And she saw herself standing among them somehow, though impossible ages separated the memories. Halie. Vale's voice cut through the visions. Stop before it binds to you completely. She realized the chains were wrapping around her arms too now, made from the same silver light pouring out of her body. The herald laughed suddenly despite being dragged downward. You are the key. The chains tightened. Agony ripped through Halie's nervous system. She gasped and nearly collapsed. Instantly Enyalius reached for her again despite his own mortal injuries. This time when he caught her shoulders, she did not flinch away. Look at me, he demanded hoarsely. Halie could barely focus through the pain. You're bleeding. I've survived worse. Liar. A faint smile flickered across his face at the word. Then seriousness returned immediately. You can't carry this alone. I don't know how to stop it. The chains continued climbing higher along her body. Vale approached carefully from the other side. The seal is trying to anchor itself through your soul permanently. Meaning? Meaning you become the prison. Silence hit harder than the battle itself. Halie stared at him in disbelief. Forever? Vale did not answer immediately. That was answer enough. Enyalius's grip on her shoulders tightened with sudden panic. No, there may not be another way, Vale said quietly. There's always another way. Not for things older than creation. The herald continued sinking into the abyssal crack while laughing through broken mouths. Below all realms she shall wait alone. Enyalius turned toward Vale with murder blazing openly in his eyes now. Fix this. I'm trying. Try harder. Halie barely heard them anymore. The visions were growing stronger. She could feel the devourers pressing against the weakening seal beneath reality itself. Endless hunger. Endless loneliness. If the barrier failed completely, entire worlds would vanish. She understood that instinctively now. And she understood something worse. The prison responded to her because it recognized her grief. Not metaphorically. Literally. Divine sorrow was the foundation holding the devourers back. Every celestial daughter sacrificed across history had strengthened the seal through loss. Halie's suffering had awakened it because her pain rivaled theirs. The realization sickened her. Heaven had built eternity atop broken women. Vale suddenly stiffened beside her as if realizing something important. His eyes snapped toward Enyalius. The bond. Enyalius frowned. What? You and Halie. Vale pointed toward the silver chains climbing her body. The seal responds to divine grief and sacrifice. But her connection to you is still active. Halie looked between them weakly. I don't understand. Vale spoke rapidly now. You saved his life with your blood years ago. That created a soul bond between you. Enyalius's expression shifted immediately. Can it share the burden? Possibly. Do it. Vale hesitated. It could kill you both. Enyalius answered without pause. Do it. Halie grabbed his arm despite the pain ripping through her body. No, he looked down at her. You think I'm letting you face eternity alone? You already gave up heaven for me once, she whispered bitterly. Look how that ended. The words clearly hurt him, but he did not step away. Then let me choose correctly this time. Before she could argue further, the herald surged violently against the chains. The silver restraints cracked. Black light exploded outward across the district again. Vale cursed. Decision now.
Enyalius moved first. He pressed one blood-covered hand against Halie's chest directly over her heart. Golden light flared instantly between them. Halie gasped as the old bond awakened fully for the first time in years. Every emotion crashed through her all at once from his side of the connection. Love so intense it physically hurt. Crushing guilt. Rage at himself. Terror of losing her again. There were no walls left now, no lies possible between them. She felt everything. Enyalius spoke while the light burned around them both. I should have trusted you. The confession carried through the bond like fire. I should have torn apart heaven before letting them touch you. Halie's vision blurred with tears she had refused to shed for years. You abandoned me. I know. His voice broke completely. And I will regret it beyond death. The chains surged upward again, wrapping around both of them now. Vale placed his hands over theirs and unleashed crimson power into the bond. The entire district erupted with light. Halie screamed as memories poured through her mind too quickly to process. She saw Enyalius during the years after her disappearance, destroying temples while searching for answers. She saw him discovering the truth about Lyessa and collapsing to his knees afterward in horror. She saw him carrying her old healer's cloak alone through empty palace halls at night because he could not bear to let servants move it. And she saw the moment he learned about their child. The memory shattered her most of all. Enyalius had killed 3 priests with his bare hands before anyone managed restraining him. He had screamed until his voice gave out entirely. The grief inside him was not smaller than hers. Only different. The silver chains suddenly stopped tightening. The herald screamed below them as the seal pulsed violently. Halie realized the burden was spreading between their souls instead of anchoring solely to her. Not enough to imprison them completely. Just enough to stabilize the breach. Vale staggered backward, breathing hard. It's working. The cracks across Noctis Vale began closing slowly one by one. Shadow creatures dissolved into smoke. The herald thrashed violently while sinking deeper beneath the earth. This changes nothing, it roared. The hunger remains. So do we, Halie answered. With one final pulse of silver light, the herald vanished beneath the closing seal. Silence crashed across the ruined district afterward. No more whispers. No more roaring. Only distant fires and exhausted breathing. Halie nearly collapsed from weakness, but Enyalius caught her before she hit the ground. This time she allowed it because she no longer possessed strength to resist. Around them, demons and celestial soldiers alike stared in stunned disbelief at the sealed fractures throughout the city. Vale looked toward the dark horizon uneasily. The breach is closed, he said quietly. But only temporarily. Halie rested weakly against Enyalius's chest while exhaustion consumed her. How temporary? Vale met her eyes grimly. Long enough for the real war to begin. Dawn never arrived properly after the battle. A dim gray haze settled over Noctis Vale instead, turning the shattered city into a landscape of drifting ash and fractured crystal towers. Fires still burned along the river district while healers moved through the streets carrying the wounded on improvised stretchers. The glowing canals had darkened to a dull silver, and every few minutes faint tremors still rippled beneath the ground as though something deep below continued testing the repaired seal. Halie sat atop the broken steps outside her ruined clinic wrapped in a black cloak someone had draped around her shoulders hours earlier. She could barely remember the moments after the herald vanished. Exhaustion had hollowed her out completely. Her hands still trembled from the power she unleashed. Across the street, celestial soldiers worked beside abyssal guards clearing debris from collapsed homes. The sight would have seemed impossible only yesterday. Enyalius stood several yards away speaking with commanders from both sides. Even injured, he dominated the space around him effortlessly. The ripped flesh across his side had partially healed thanks to divine regeneration, though golden bandages still wrapped his torso beneath damaged armor. Every so often his gaze drifted back toward Halie as if checking she remained there. He never approached without invitation now. Vale emerged from the smoke carrying 2 cups of steaming black tea.
One he handed silently to Halie before lowering himself beside her on the steps.
For several minutes neither spoke.
You nearly became an eternal prison, he remarked finally.
Halie stared into the cup. That sounds dramatic. It was dramatic.
Fair. Vale leaned back against the cracked stone behind them. The silver markings along his throat looked faded from exhaustion. The city's council wants to crown you something insufferable.
No, I already told them you'd say that. What were the options?
The abyssal mother of sorrows was my least favorite. Halie almost smiled despite herself.
Silence settled again.
Below them, survivors searched through wreckage for missing relatives while healers called instructions across the streets. The ordinary grief of disaster felt strangely grounding after everything else.
You knew the seal would try binding to me, Halie said quietly.
Vale did not deny it.
I suspected.
And you still brought me here.
Because heaven was killing you.
His tone sharpened for the first time.
Do not mistake imperfect choices for cruelty, Halie.
There were no clean paths left.
She exhaled slowly. I know.
Vale rubbed one hand across his face wearily before adding, for what it's worth, I was prepared to drag you out of that ritual by force if the chains became permanent.
Halie turned toward him. Even if the seal broke? Especially then.
The answer surprised her. Before she could respond, heavy footsteps approached through the debris. Enyalius stopped several feet away, visibly tense despite trying to hide it. The council chambers are secure now, he said to Halie.
You should rest somewhere safer.
Vale immediately rose.
Wonderful.
The husband arrives.
Enyalius's eyes narrowed dangerously. We are not having this conversation again. I enjoy this conversation.
Halie pinched the bridge of her nose.
If either of you starts threatening the other before sunrise, I'm throwing both of you into the river. Surprisingly, that ended the tension immediately.
Vale smirked faintly and stepped away toward the lower streets. Enyalius watched him leave with undisguised distrust before finally turning back to Halie. Up close he looked worse than she realized. Dark circles shadowed his eyes.
Several
new scars crossed his face beneath dried blood. For the first time she noticed silver strands beginning to appear near his temples despite divine immortality. Stress was physically aging him. The discovery unsettled her. You should be healing, she said before thinking. Something vulnerable flickered briefly across his expression at the concern hidden inside the words.
So should you.
Halie looked away first.
I'm fine.
You nearly died. I've nearly died several times lately. Enyalius crouched slowly beside the steps rather than sitting beside her directly.
Careful. Always careful now.
The celestial healers examined the seal fractures, he said quietly.
Vale was right.
The barrier below the abyss is unstable.
Can it be repaired permanently? Nobody knows.
He hesitated. The oldest records about the Devourers were destroyed after the First Celestial War.
Most gods believed they were myths. Halie remembered the visions from the chains. Not myths.
No, his gaze darkened. And if word spreads that the seal responds to you, everyone will want control of me.
Or fear you.
The honesty hurt less than false reassurance would have.
Halie watched smoke drift upward through the broken skyline.
Part of me almost accepted their offer.
Enyalius stiffened visibly.
Halie, I heard our child's voice. Her throat tightened instantly around the confession.
I knew it wasn't real. I knew it was manipulation.
But for a moment, she pressed trembling fingers against her eyes.
For a moment I wanted the world to burn if it meant hearing that voice again. Silence stretched between them.
Then Enyalius lowered himself fully onto the step below hers.
Not touching. Just close enough for his presence to feel solid.
When I learned about the baby, he said quietly, I destroyed the Hall of Judgment.
Halie glanced toward him in surprise. The entire thing?
Most of it. A humorless smile crossed his face briefly.
Several senators still refuse entering rooms with me. She imagined the towering marble chambers shattered beneath his rage and unexpectedly understood it perfectly. Enyalius stared out across the ruined district while speaking. 4 months afterward I kept thinking about names. Halie's breath caught. Names? I didn't know if it was a boy or girl. His voice grew rougher. So I kept choosing both. Pain twisted through her chest so sharply she almost doubled over. She had spent years believing he never cared. Now every revelation arrived too late to heal anything cleanly. Stop, she whispered. I can't carry this and hate you at the same time. The words seemed to strike him speechless. Before either could continue, bells suddenly rang across Noctis Vale. Not alarm bells this time. Warning bells. Enyalius rose instantly. Soldiers throughout the district looked toward the northern cliffs where dark shapes had appeared beyond the mist. Halie stood more slowly, exhaustion forgotten. Hundreds of figures were approaching the city through the ash-covered valleys below. Not celestial soldiers. Not demons either. These travelers wore heavy gray cloaks marked with silver symbols Halie did not recognize. At their center walked towering creatures made entirely from polished bone. Who are they? She asked. Enyalius's expression hardened. The morning court. Vale reappeared beside them abruptly, visibly irritated. Of course they arrived now. Halie frowned. You know them? Everyone knows them. Vale's mouth twisted with dislike. They collect dangerous relics, forbidden prophecies, cursed bloodlines, anything connected to ancient catastrophes. That sounds concerning. It becomes more concerning when you realize they answer to nobody. The gates of Noctis Vale opened reluctantly as the procession entered the city. Civilians backed away nervously. Even hardened demons avoided eye contact with the bone creatures escorting the travelers. At the center of the group walked a woman dressed entirely in pale silver robes layered with chains. Her hair, impossibly long and white, drifted behind her like smoke despite the still air. A black veil covered her eyes. Yet somehow Halie felt the woman looking directly at her from the moment she entered the district. The procession stopped several yards away. The veiled woman stepped forward alone. Halie of Astra Vale, she said. Her voice sounded calm enough to quiet the surrounding chaos automatically. You have awakened the gate sorrow. Vale muttered something extremely vulgar under his breath. Enyalius moved subtly closer to Halie. State your purpose. The veiled woman ignored him entirely. I am Seraphel of the Morning Court. She inclined her head slightly toward Halie. And if you remain here, the seal beneath the abyss will collapse within months. A murmur spread through the nearby soldiers. Halie forced herself to remain steady. You seem very certain. Because this has happened before. That silenced everyone. Seraphel lifted one pale hand toward the distant mountains beyond Noctis Vale. Long before your kingdoms existed, another celestial daughter carried grief powerful enough to weaken the prison below reality. Her hidden gaze shifted toward Halie again. The gods buried her alive beneath the world to stabilize the seal. Cold dread slid through Halie's stomach. You're lying. I wish I were. Seraphel reached into her robes slowly. Instantly dozens of celestial soldiers raised weapons while Vale's claws extended. The woman merely withdrew a thin crystal shard glowing faintly silver. Inside the crystal